So I'm gonna go ahead and get started by straining some sauerkraut. Be sure to squeeze all that brine out of there. We don't want it to be too salty. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and rinse out the rest of the brine. Again, it'll add way too much salt. So by rinsing it, it still retains its pickled flavor, but isn't quite as salty. Let's dump that into the bottom of a big pot and spread it on out. And I'm gonna go ahead and shred a head of cabbage. This is a small head, but if you've got a large head, then just use half. Sometimes you gotta use the right tool for the job. Throw that on top of the sauerkraut, and we're gonna set the pot to low heat. Cover it up and let it go until the cabbage starts to wilt. In the meantime, I'm gonna dice up some thick cut bacon into 1 centimeter squares. If you've got something like pancetta, then go ahead and use that instead. Spread it out into the bottom of a pan and let it start to render out and brown. In the meantime, we're gonna slice and dice an onion. Once the fat's rendered out of the bacon, we can add that in and start to wilt it. And once it's translucent, we're gonna add in some pork. Here I've got 2 pork chops. This is about a kilo's worth. But if you've got pork shoulder, then go ahead and use that instead. It's got a better distribution of fat. I'm gonna cube this up into 2 centimeter cubes. Then I'll scooch everything to the side in my pan and throw in the pork and let that get a nice brown on it. Flip it over when one side is done. And then we're gonna dice up some kielbasa. Slice it lengthwise, and then lengthwise into quarters, then dice it into 1 centimeter dice. Go ahead and add that in and let it get brown as well. Back to the cabbage is looking nice and wilted, so I'm gonna go ahead and rehydrate some dried mushrooms. I've got some shiitakes here, but you can use porcini or anything you've got on hand. This is a nice touch because it'll add some umami to the flavor profile. Once those are good and rehydrated, throw them with the water into their own pan and let them boil away until that water is reduced. Dump those guys in with the cabbage. And then we've got some dried plums, aka prunes. Just a handful of those, and we're gonna slice those into little pieces. This will add some sweetness and some depth to the flavor. And if you haven't had prunes in a while, they kind of taste like a cross between figs and raisins. Next, I've got about 100 mils of tomato paste and 250 mils of red wine. I'm using Cabernet, but you can use any dry red wine. I've got about a teaspoon of peppercorns, a couple bay leaves, 2 teaspoons of paprika, and a teaspoon of allspice. If you got whole allspice berries, then use those instead. And if you've got juniper berries, throw those in as well. I never see those in the store though, so I am leaving them out. Let's throw in our meat. And go ahead and give it a good mix. And you'll notice I'm not adding any salt here. Remember, there's sauerkraut and the bacon and kielbasa. All of those are very salty, so it's not necessary in this dish. Don't feel like you're missing out on anything. I'm gonna cover that up and let it go for at least 3 hours. You can really let this go as long as you want. The longer it goes, the deeper the flavor is gonna be. And as a matter of fact, after 3 hours, I put it in the fridge overnight and reheated it, and it tastes much deeper than it did last night. So the main flavors we're dealing with here are the meats, the kielbasa, and the spices and cabbage, and a little wine as well. So it's got a really Northern European flavor profile, very Polish, very Bavarian almost. It's almost as if somebody took a plate of sausage and cabbage and turned it into a stew, which I guess is kind of accurate. And you know what? That turned into a good thing because this is hearty and homey, comforting and flavorful. And all in all, it's not labor intensive to make. You know, the actual prep work, aside from the 3-hour stewing process, it doesn't require any special ingredients or special preparation. There are versions of this where you cook everything separately and then put it all together. I say no to that. There's nothing from a food science standpoint that would make that any better than this, right? If they're all being combined in the end and stewed together, then what's the point? So if you've got a ton of meat lying around as well as some cabbage, maybe this is something you want to put together. So as always, I've got a link to the full recipe in the description below. And if you like this recipe, then check out this video where I show you how to make Austrian-style dumplings, which I think would go pretty well with this dish. See you next time. Cheers.